Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're navigating a really pivotal era in recent American history. The Trump era examined.
It's certainly a period that sparks a lot of discussion.
Absolutely. We're embarking on quite an expansive journey through the policy shifts and their profound impacts during this time. And our guide is a remarkably detailed source, the book, From Jobs to Justice, The Trump Era Examined.
Yes, it offers a really comprehensive look, doesn't it? It covers so much ground.
It really does. Everything from economic performance to foreign relations. It gives us this unique lens to understand a time that, well, continues to shape our world. So our mission today, okay, let's unpack this. We want to distill the most significant policies and their reported outcomes across a whole range of sectors. The goal is to give you a clearer understanding of this complex period.
A shortcut to getting informed, essentially.
Exactly. And importantly, we need to state this up front. We're here to objectively present the content and reported outcomes straight from this source material. We want to ensure a balanced representation, without endorsing any particular viewpoints or political stances, just laying out what the book reports.
And to build on that, what truly stands out in the source material is just how diverse these policy changes were. And interconnected. They genuinely touched nearly every aspect of American life and international relations, often simultaneously. It created a broad and sometimes, well, unconventional policy footprint.
That's a great way to put it.
Our goal in this deep dive is really to help you not just see the individual policy initiatives in isolation, but to, connect the dots between them, understanding their broader implications and maybe prompting some critical thinking about the what and the why behind these pretty significant shifts.
That's precisely right. So let's dive straight into our first major area, the economic landscape. We're talking growth, jobs, income.
A core focus, Steph.
Yeah, here's where the narrative really starts to unfold, especially when we talk about economic growth during this period. The Trump administration, kicking off in January 2017, they implemented a variety of economic policies explicitly aimed at stimulating growth, boosting the U.S. economy. And one of the standout figures from the source is that reported 4.2% GDP growth in the second quarter of 2018.
A pretty striking number.
It is. Now, it's crucial context here that this administration, it inherited an economy already in recovery. The book highlights that unemployment rates, for instance, were already steadily declining. They dipped below 5% by late 2016.
Right, so there's some momentum already there.
Exactly. The source attributes this continued and sometimes accelerated growth to a combination of specific policies, things designed to stimulate the economy. We're talking significant deregulation, we'll definitely get into that later, and those sweeping tax cuts.
Key pillars of their strategy.
For sure. And the falling unemployment rate is a key indicator the book emphasizes. It reached around 3.8% by mid-2018, and then by late 2019, it hit a historic low of 3.5%. I mean, that's a figure not seen since 1969.
Really remarkable. And that tight labor market has knock-on effects, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This robust labor market reportedly fueled increased consumer confidence, more people working, feeling secure, seeing wages start to tick up.
Yeah.
That in turn drove pretty robust consumer spending. It created this vital cycle that helped sustain that 4.2% growth rate we saw in Q2 2018. It paints a picture of a strong domestic economy at that point.
But as always, the story isn't quite that simple, is it?
Not at all. The source also points directly to the huge disruption caused by the unforeseen COVID-19 pandemic. This unprecedented global event starting in early 2020, it dramatically revealed some underlying vulnerabilities in what had looked like a booming economy.
Yeah, it was a massive shock to the system.
Massive. By April 2020, unemployment skyrocketed to an all-time high of 14.7%, just staggering. And an astonishing 22 million jobs were initially lost. Businesses closed, economic activity ground to a halt.
And the recovery wasn't instantaneous.
No, the book notes the recovery post-pandemic was characterized as sluggish, actually, with varying rates of job creation. It hit certain sectors and demographics much harder than others. And this definitely raises some questions, about the long-term sustainability of the growth before the pandemic. How resilient was the economy, really, to these external shocks?
That's a critical point. And if we connect this to the broader economic picture, the administration's policies were often characterized by a more, shall we say, protectionist stance. It was aimed quite directly at shielding American industries from what they saw as unfair global competition.
Right, the America First idea in practice.
Exactly. The source details the significant effort to renegotiate key trade agreements, most notably the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA. That was forged to replace NAFTA.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a renaming, it was a substantial reevaluation of North American trade.
What were some of the key changes there?
Well, it had New provisions for digital trade, adjusted automotive manufacturing standards, things like requiring more content to be made in North America, it signaled a shift in priorities.
Okay. And beyond North America?
Well, beyond those agreements, the administration also implemented tariffs on specific imports like steel and aluminum, and then a wide array of goods from China.
The trade war narrative.
Precisely. The stated goal here, as the book explains, was clear. Protect American industries from dumping or unfair competition, and crucially, reduce those long-standing trade deficits. The administration saw those as detrimental to domestic manufacturing.
But what was the actual impact, according to the source?
Well, the impact, according to the source, was kind of dual-edged. While some domestic sectors reportedly benefited, maybe some steel mills saw increased orders. Others, particularly agriculture, suffered significantly.
How so?
Retaliatory tariffs. Other nations hit back, imposing tariffs on American farm products like soybeans and pork.
Ouch. That must have hurt farmers.
Big time. It led to considerable financial strain, and that prompted the federal government to step in with relief measures, including the massive CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act.
Right, which had those direct payments and expanded unemployment benefits.
Yes, designed to buffer that economic shock.
Mm-hmm.
But it started in part to deal with the fallout from the trade disputes affecting farmers. So this all raises an important question for you, the listener. What does this mean for the long-term sustainability and equity of such growth when certain sectors face these significant setbacks?
Yeah, does protecting one industry necessarily come at the cost of another? How do you balance those impacts?
Exactly. It's a complex calculation.
That's a crucial point, and the book really delves into that paradox, doesn't it? While CARES provided immediate relief, what did the source say about the lasting impact on those agricultural sectors beyond the aid? Did they fully recover, or did those retaliatory tariffs leave a permanent scar? Maybe force a rethink of our trade dependencies?
It's a really good question, and the source suggests it wasn't a simple bounce back. The disruptions were significant and potentially altered long-term market relationships for some agricultural exports.
Interesting, because it's fascinating how the source juxtaposes that macro-level picture, the trade wars and tariffs, with the very granular data on specific job sectors. Moving beyond just the aggregate figures, the book highlights a significant positive trend in employment levels. It led to record-low unemployment rates for various specific demographic groups and sectors. It reflects a really wide-ranging impact across the labor market.
Yeah, they often highlighted those specific demographic gains.
They did. For example, the unemployment rate for African Americans reportedly fell from about 7.8% at the start of 2017 down to 5.8% by the end of that year, and then to a remarkable 4.5% by 2019. Truly historic lows.
It's a significant drop.
Huge. For Hispanic Americans, their median household income rose by 3.7%, surpassing $50,000 for the first time ever. And their home ownership rates reached their highest levels in nearly a decade. Asian Americans also saw a historic low unemployment rate of just 2%.
Wow.
Veterans, too. They experienced a historic milestone in their unemployment rates, and that's a group often facing unique challenges getting back into the civilian workforce.
Absolutely.
Even disabled Americans saw a significant decrease. Their unemployment rate fell from around 12.6% in 2016 down to levels comparable with non-disabled individuals. That indicates improved access to jobs. And notably, Americans without a high school diploma achieved record low unemployment rates. That's quite significant, as this group often faces the steepest barriers.
That is significant. What about younger workers?
Well, youth unemployment dynamics were influenced by increased demand for entry-level positions, especially in retail and hospitality, and also the burgeoning rise of the gig economy, offering flexible work. And in manufacturing, often seen as that bellwether for industrial strength, there was a reported increase of more than 400,000 jobs.
So a broad-based improvement across many different groups, according to the source.
That's what the data presented suggests. So what were the stated policies contributing to these specific trends, according to the source? Well, the book points to that America First trade policy, aiming to promote domestic production, bring jobs back home, plus significant deregulation in key sectors like energy and manufacturing.
Right, reducing regulatory burdens.
Exactly, like streamlining permitting for infrastructure projects was highlighted as directly boosting construction activity. There was also a notable focus on programs supporting vocational training and apprenticeships, recognizing the need for a skilled workforce to fill these jobs.
A supply-side focus, too.
Right. And it's also acknowledged, importantly, that some of these improvements built upon economic momentum from the previous administration. It suggests a continuity of progress, an economy already on an upward path. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Well, these trends reportedly contributed to increased representation for minority workers in sectors like construction, hospitality, healthcare. It reflects a broader impact on diverse communities, a diversification of the workforce in some areas.
This really raises an important question, though, about job satisfaction and the overall optimism, the feeling in the labor market during this time. Was it just about numbers?
Good point. What does the source say on that?
Well, the source points to a high degree of job market optimism. It notes that nearly two-thirds of Americans rated the period as a good time to find a quality job. And that sentiment saw a remarkable 25% growth in optimistic feelings compared to previous years. That indicates a noticeable shift in public perception about economic opportunity.
So people were feeling better about finding work. Apparently so. And several factors reportedly influenced this and contributed to rising wages, too. The book highlights wage growth reaching 3.1% in August 2018. That was the highest in nearly a decade at that point.
And why was that happening?
Well, it wasn't just a number on a chart. A tight labor market, more jobs available than qualified workers naturally put pressure on employers. They had to raise wages to attract and retain talent.
Basic supply and demand.
Exactly. It created an environment where employees reportedly had increased leverage. They could negotiate for better pay, maybe improve benefits, more favorable working conditions, all contributing to potentially higher satisfaction rates.
Makes sense. More bargaining power for workers.
Right. However, it's crucial to acknowledge, as the source does, that perceptions of optimism and wage growth, well, they varied significantly across different demographic groups.
How so?
Factors like education level, race, geographic location, specific industry sectors, they all influenced individual experiences, individual thoughts about the job market.
So not everyone felt the boom equally.
Precisely. For instance, the book mentions that underemployment for women remained a concern. So while aggregate unemployment rates might have been low, the quality and stability of jobs for all demographics weren't universally positive.
Meaning some women might have been working part-time but wanted full-time or in jobs below their skill level?
Exactly that kind of thing. And the source also suggests that the unprecedented disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic necessitated a reassessment of what constitutes satisfaction in the modern workplace.
So the pandemic changed how people thought about work itself.
Yeah, it highlighted how quickly external events can reshape economic realities and worker expectations. It pushed us to rethink traditional metrics of job quality beyond just, the paycheck. Flexibility, safety, meaning those became much bigger factors.
That deep dive into the nuances of the job market brings us perfectly to how the administration sought to reshape the very fabric of the American business environment, primarily through its ambitious tax cuts and extensive deregulation efforts. Let's break down the bold strokes of these policy changes.
Two massive areas, definitely.
For sure. Our source heavily features the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, the TCJA, as really a cornerstone of this reshaping. This was a truly landmark piece of legislation, the largest overhaul of the U.S. tax code in decades.
Absolutely. Huge changes.
One of its most significant changes was that dramatic reduction of the corporate tax rate, down from 35% to 21%.
A massive cut. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, the stated aim, as the book explains, was multifold. Stimulate economic activity, make the U.S. more competitive, globally aligning our rate with other developed nations, and crucially, encourage businesses to reinvest their earnings back into the U.S. economy.
Instead of keeping profits overseas.
Exactly, rather than holding them overseas or investing abroad. The argument was, lower taxes free up capital for companies to expand, hire, innovate right here. Now, for individual Americans, the standard deduction was effectively doubled.
That impacted a lot of people directly.
It did. To put that in perspective, for single filers, it went from roughly $6,350 up to $12,000. For married couples filing jointly, from $12,700 up to $24,000. The idea was to provide significant financial relief to millions by reducing their taxable income, put more money directly into their pockets, theoretically encouraging consumer spending.
And the child tax credit.
That also saw a significant expansion. It increased from $1,000 to $2,000 per qualifying child. This was aimed at giving families more financial flexibility, helping offset the high costs of raising kids, boosting consumer spending, and importantly, the source estimates it was projected to lift millions of children out of poverty, a direct financial boost for low and middle income families.
Okay. What about businesses, especially smaller ones?
Good question. The TCJA created a 20% deduction for qualified business income. That's Section 199A. This meant many small businesses, often structured as pass-through entities like sole proprietorships, partnerships, S-corp, could significantly reduce their taxable income. It essentially lowered their effective tax rate, even if they weren't traditional C corporations. Pitched as a boost to the backbone of the economy, small businesses.
Got it. And the estate tax.
Right. The estate tax exemption, often called the death tax by critics, was significantly elevated. It increased the amount of an estate exempt from federal tax quite substantially. This was intended to provide financial security for family farms, small businesses, letting them retain control without immediate pressure to sell off assets just to pay taxes when an owner died. A big concern for multi-generational businesses.
So a lot of moving parts in that one bill.
Absolutely. The stated rationale behind all these sweeping reforms, as the source explains, was pretty clear. Stimulate economic growth, incentivize spending and investment, encourage repatriation of those trillions in foreign profits held by U.S. corporations. The belief was this would ultimately lead to higher investments in wages and job creation across the board.
And were there immediate effects reported?
There were some that proponents highlighted, yes. The source cites a surge of over $300 billion in capital expenditures by U.S. businesses in the first quarter of 2018. That indicated a rapid reinvestment of corporate profits. And companies like AT&T, Walmart, they publicly announced one-time bonuses and wage increases shortly after the TCJA passed. That contributed to the perception that the cuts were, in fact, benefiting employees directly.
But it wasn't all positive reception, was it?
No, definitely not. The source also acknowledges significant criticisms and potential downsides. It notes the benefits were reportedly disproportionately skewed toward corporations and the wealthy. The largest tax reductions went to the highest earners and large businesses, while some of the middle-class tax cuts were set to expire. They were temporary. Furthermore, the TCJA was projected to add roughly $1.9 trillion to the national deficit over 10 years. That raised serious concerns among fiscal conservatives and others about potential future cuts to essential social programs to offset that debt.
The debt impact was a major point of debate.
Huge. The book also points out that wage growth, despite those initial projections and some notable examples, was described as uneven. Not always as pronounced as initially anticipated for all workers, especially those at the lower end of the income scale. And finally, the reduction of state and local tax deductions, the SALT deduction cap at $10,000 that notably impacted taxpayers in high-tax states, places like New York, California, New Jersey.
Right, because their state and local taxes often exceed that cap.
Exactly. So for many residents in those states, it effectively meant a tax increase, drawing considerable criticism.
Okay, so that covers the tax side. What about deregulation?
Right, the other major pillar.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating here is how the administration pursued this really systematic and often rapid dismantling of regulations across various sectors. It was often guided by that two out, one in policy. Remember that. For every new regulation proposed, at least two existing ones had to be identified for elimination.
I do remember that. Did it have a measurable impact?
Well, the source indicates these broad deregulation efforts reportedly achieved over $8 billion in lifetime net regulatory cost savings. That's a significant figure that proponents emphasized as reducing burdens on businesses, freeing them up.
Okay, $8 billion. Where did those savings primarily come from? Let's delve into some specifics because the impact must have varied widely.
Oh, absolutely. In terms of environmental deregulation, the administration rolled back numerous regulations, particularly in energy and manufacturing sectors. A prime example is replacing the Obama-era Waters of the U.S. rule, WS, with a narrower Navigable Waters Protection Rule, or NWPR.
What was the difference there?
WOTUS aimed to protect a wider range of waterways from pollution, including many smaller streams and wetlands. The NWPR removed federal jurisdiction over many of those, especially waters that only flow seasonally or wetlands not directly next to permanent water bodies.
Okay, narrowing the scope of federal protection.
Exactly. Another big one was rescinding the Obama administration's hydraulic fracturing rule, which had imposed federal standards for fracking on federal and tribal lands.
And the argument for these rollbacks.
Proponents argued they would spur economic growth and job creation. They pointed, for instance, to a reported resurgence of blue-collar jobs in Appalachia due to coal and natural gas deregulation, a revitalization of industries they felt were hampered by excessive oversight.
But there must have been pushback.
Oh, serious concerns. Critics raised alarms about long-term environmental degradation, potential air and water quality issues, and disproportionate effects on vulnerable populations living near these industrial sites. It highlights that fundamental tension. economic activity versus ecological protection.
Right. What about financial deregulation?
Also a major focus. There were concerted efforts to roll back parts of the Dodd-Frank Act. Remember, Dodd-Frank was enacted after the 2008 financial crisis to prevent another meltdown.
Increased oversight, capital requirements for banks?
Right. The Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act of 2018, for example, eased regulations for small and mid-sized banks. It raised the threshold for being a systemically important financial institution, needing stricter oversight from $50 billion to $250 billion in assets.
So fewer banks faced that tight scrutiny.
Correct. The goal, proponents said, was to promote lending and economic growth by freeing up capital banks would otherwise hold in reserve.
And the counter-argument?
Critics warned that loosening regulations, particularly for those larger regional banks now under less scrutiny, could lead to increased risky behavior, echoing concerns from before 2008 that lax oversight contributed to the housing market collapse.
A familiar debate?
Very much so. Furthermore, the source highlights the unprecedented, really record-level use of the Congressional Review Act, the CRA.
Explain the CRA again briefly.
Sure, it's maybe lesser known, but it allows Congress to quickly invalidate federal regulations finalized by executive agencies within a certain window, usually 60 legislative days. It's a fast track to undoing rules.
And it was used a lot.
Extensively. It led to significant policy changes, reversing many regulations from the previous administration without lengthy processes. But this efficiency, well, it often came at the cost of detailed public input. It also raised questions about long-term regulatory stability if rules could be reversed so easily, and the politicization of what had often been a more technical regulatory process.
So quick reversals, but maybe less stable policy.
Potentially. And this really raises an important question for you to consider. What is that ongoing tension between economic imperatives wanting to cut costs, stimulate business, and the essential need for regulatory oversight? Oversight that protects public health, environmental safety, financial stability.
Rating that balance.
Exactly. Where future administrations draw that line will undoubtedly continue to be a significant debate in American policy.
That systematic dismantling of regulations truly touches so many aspects of American life, including, critically, healthcare. So with that in mind, what does this all mean for you in terms of healthcare access and broader community well-being? Let's shift gears to that.
A huge area of focus and change, certainly.
Our source highlights several key shifts in healthcare access and affordability, particularly revolving around the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. First, the administration effectively cut Obamacare's individual mandate penalty. They did that as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
Setting the penalty to zero.
Yeah, exactly. The mandate required most Americans to have health insurance or pay a tax penalty. By setting that penalty to $0, they removed the financial incentive to buy ACA-compliant plans. Now, this freed individuals from a penalty, but it also led to predictions of destabilization in the ACA marketplaces, and reportedly a decrease in enrollment, especially among younger, healthier people.
Because without the penalty, they might opt out, leaving a sicker, more expensive pool of people insured.
That was the concern, yes. Potentially raising premiums for everyone else on those exchanges. Next, there's an expansion of short-term, limited-duration health plans.
These were meant to be temporary gap fillers originally.
Right, but the administration championed them as a lower-cost alternative to ACA plans. Proponents argued they provided more affordable options, more consumer choice, especially for those finding ACA premiums too high.
But what were the downsides?
Well, critics, as the source notes, raised significant concerns about their limited coverage, especially for pre-existing conditions which they weren't required to cover like ACA plans were. So cheaper, but less comprehensive, potentially much less comprehensive. It could lead to substantial financial risks if someone got seriously ill or injured. These plans often had benefit caps and didn't cover all the essential health benefits mandated by the ACA.
A trade-off between cost and coverage.
Definitely. Thirdly, rules were expanded for association health plans, or AHPs. What did those allow? They allowed small businesses, even self-employed individuals, to band together, sometimes across state lines, to buy insurance as if they were a single large employer, trying to get economies of scale, kind of. A key aspect was that these AHP plans weren't required to adhere to all ACA mandates, meaning they could offer cheaper premiums, maybe by excluding certain benefits or charging more based on health status.
So again, potentially lower cost, but maybe fewer protections?
That was the dynamic. Proponents argued it reduced costs, increased choice, and competition in the small business market. The source notes they were seen as beneficial for businesses with high employee turnover, offering more flexible, potentially cheaper options. So the overall rationale behind these shifts, mandate repeal short-term plans, AHPs, was about affordability and choice. Primarily, yes. Offering more affordable options, increasing consumer choice by reducing what were perceived as regulatory burdens associated with the ACA. But as we've discussed, this all raises that important question. How do you balance affordability and choice with comprehensive, robust coverage, especially for vulnerable populations who might really need those stronger protections?
And the source notes this is still very much a live debate, right? Subsequent administrations looking to revisit these programs.
Absolutely. The source reminds us that subsequent administrations have expressed intentions to revise aspects of the healthcare system, including reevaluating these very programs. It underscores that ongoing debate. Now, beyond healthcare access and the ACA, the administration also declared the opioid crisis a nationwide public health emergency.
A devastating issue across the country.
Truly devastating. Given the alarming rise in overdose deaths, especially from synthetic opioids like fentanyl, it had become this pervasive, deadly threat. The administration implemented a multifaceted approach: law enforcement, treatment, prevention, trying to tackle it from various angles.
What did that look like in practice?
Well, on the funding front, nearly $1 billion was allocated in 2018 to states through targeted grants under the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, CIRA. These grants were meant to enhance prevention, treatment, recovery efforts tailored to local needs, giving states flexibility to address their specific challenges, whether it was expanding access to naloxone or funding community education.
So empowering states to act.
Right. For treatment expansion, the administration supported creating the Medication-Assisted Treatment, or MAT, expansion initiative, aiming to improve access to MAT, that combination of medication, counseling, behavioral therapies, acknowledging its effectiveness and sustained recovery.
What about the supply side? Enforcement.
A big focus there, too. The DEA launched significant operations to disrupt the supply chain. For instance, in April 2018, 28 medical professionals were arrested for excessive or inappropriate opioid prescriptions. Efforts specifically targeted those problematic pill mills and border security. Fentanyl often comes from abroad.
Exactly. There was a strong focus on border security. IC Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, dedicated nearly 630,000 investigative hours just to stopping illegal fentanyl imports. They made over 11,000 narcotics-related arrests in FY 2017 alone. And legislation like the Interdict Act focused on enhancing screening of international mail, recognizing how easily these drugs could be shipped.
Tackling multiple routes of entry. Yes. And finally, for community-based prevention, they supported things like National Prescription Drug Take-Back Days, facilitating safe disposal of unused meds to prevent misuse. And they formed the Joint Criminal Opioid Darknet Enforcement Team, J-Code, under the DOJ, to combat illegal opioid sales online on the darknet, acknowledging that shift to digital drug trafficking.
A comprehensive strategy on paper.
It aimed to be. Tackling the supply chain international, online, while also supporting treatment and prevention here at home. However, the source does highlight the ongoing challenges, like the rapid evolution of darknet tech, traffickers' adaptability, and tragically, deaths from synthetic opioids significantly increased during this period, despite those efforts.
A reminder of how entrenched and difficult this crisis is.
Absolutely. It points to the need for continued investment in training, resources, public-private partnerships, emphasizing that a balanced approach is crucial for any sustainable impact against this ever-evolving crisis.
And if we connect this to the broader picture of social well-being, the administration also addressed other specific health and social challenges beyond just the opioid crisis. It demonstrated, a clear commitment to certain areas of public health and welfare.
Like what, for example?
Well, for instance, the Comprehensive Childhood Cancer Act was signed into law. This aimed to boost research funding for pediatric cancers, improve data collection, enhance access to clinical trials for kids, fostering crucial collaboration to accelerate breakthroughs in a field that often gets less funding than adult cancers.
That sounds incredibly important.
It really does. Another significant initiative was the National Suicide Hotline Designation Act. This established 988 as the new, easy-to-remember 3-digit dialing code for the National Suicide Hotline.
Making it easier to access help in a crisis.
Exactly. A crucial step to improve accessibility, making it more like 911 for emergencies, reducing barriers to getting immediate mental health support. The administration also signed the Right to Try law. This sought to empower terminally ill patients by allowing them access to experimental treatments not yet FDA approved, provided certain conditions were met.
Giving patients more options, potentially.
That was the argument. Offering hope, expanding options for those facing life-limiting conditions. But it also invoked a complex ethical discussions, as the source notes, about informed consent, patient safety with unproven therapies, and equitable access. Could everyone who needed it actually get these treatments?
Right, complex issues there.
Definitely. And lastly, the source highlights significant investments in rural healthcare. Through the USDA, over $1 billion was allocated to enhance healthcare accessibility for about 2.5 million people across 41 states.
How do they do that?
By funding new hospitals, health clinics, critical access points in underserved areas. And this was coupled with robust support for telehealth initiatives, which became particularly crucial during the pandemic, didn't they? Bridging geographical gaps in access to care.
Telehealth really exploded then.
It did. So these efforts show this multifaceted approach to public health, aiming to strengthen various pillars of support for American communities: suicide prevention, cancer research, basic healthcare access in remote areas.
That's a comprehensive look at domestic policy and its immediate impacts.
Yeah.
Now let's turn our attention globally. Okay, let's unpack this next. How the administration reshaped America's place on the global stage, especially through its trade and foreign policies.
A very distinct shift in approach here, too.
Definitely. The administration pursued a distinct approach to international trade, emphasizing what it called free, fair, and reciprocal trade. That phrase underscored its desire for more balanced trade relationships. This often involved renegotiating existing agreements, actively seeking new bilateral deals, and kind of moving away from those big multilateral frameworks.
Like the USMCA replacing NAFTA.
Exactly. The most significant example, as we mentioned earlier, the USMCA. It modernized North American trade, included new provisions for digital trade, enhanced agricultural access for U.S. farmers, and adjusted those automotive manufacturing standards, increasing regional content requirements, aiming to bring more auto production back to North America and outside North America.
Well, the administration adopted a more aggressive litigation strategy at the World Trade Organization, the WTO, filing multiple disputes challenging what it saw as unfair trade practices, especially by China, targeting things like subsidies to state-owned enterprises, intellectual property theft.
Taking on the WTO system more directly, pretty directly. The KORUS agreement with South Korea was also revised in March 2018, primarily aimed at increasing American auto exports to South Korea, addressing what the administration saw as an imbalance there. And there were big deals announced with China and Vietnam.
That's right. The administration secured substantial trade and investment deals. With China, this included $250 billion in new deals, notably that Phase 1 trade deal in January 2020. It committed China to significant purchases of American agricultural products, beef, soybeans, pork, intended partly to alleviate the pain from those retaliatory tariffs on U.S. farmers.
And Vietnam.
A $12 billion deal secured there, too, aiming to expand market access for U.S. goods and services.
They also used tariffs and duties quite a bit, didn't they?
Yes, a significant increase in the use of anti-dumping and countervailing duty, AD/CVD, investigations. Over 300 initiated from 2017 to 2020.
What are those exactly?
They're tools used to protect domestic industries from unfair foreign competition, imposing duties on imports deemed to be unfairly priced or dumped or subsidized by foreign governments. Industries like steel, aluminum, washing machines, solar panels were targets.
And famously, they pulled out of a major trade deal.
Right. The administration withdrew from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, a huge multilateral agreement involving 12 Pacific Rim countries. They framed that decision as essential to protect American jobs and industries, avoiding what they saw as unfavorable terms.
So this was all driven by that America First philosophy.
Explicitly so, as the source explains, aiming to reduce trade deficits, bolster American manufacturing and agriculture. The book cites those specific figures, $250 billion with China, $12 billion with Vietnam, and notes the increase in manufacturing jobs, the reported revival of domestic industries like steel and aluminum that proponents attributed directly to these policies, arguing that strong trade enforcement and protectionism brought tangible benefits.
But again, there were criticisms.
Oh, yes. Significant criticisms, as the source details. Widespread concerns about those retaliatory tariffs hurting American farmers, which led to the administration approving up to $12 billion in aid to assist them, essentially, mitigating the damage of its own trade policies.
Kind of a contradictory situation.
It appeared that way to many. There were also challenges to the WTO's credibility because of the frequent disputes initiated by the U.S., which critics argued undermined the global trading system itself.
And what about consumers?
Concerns were raised about higher prices for consumers, resulting from tariffs on imported goods, as those costs were often passed down, impacting household budgets.
So it really raises that important question again for you, the listener. What's the long-term sustainability and global impact of these kinds of protectionist measures versus a more traditional multilateral engagement in our interconnected world?
A fundamental question indeed. And building on that, what's truly fascinating here is how the administration pursued a new, often unconventional approach to complex geopolitical challenges across the globe. It signaled a really distinct reorientation of global strategy. It wasn't just trade. It was a broader reshaping of America's international posture.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, regarding North Korea relations, there was that historic summit. President Trump and Kim Jong-un in Singapore, June 2018.
A huge media event.
Absolutely. A pivotal moment aimed at fostering peace and denuclearization through direct leader-to-leader diplomacy. A significant departure from how previous administrations had approached North Korea. It reportedly led to a temporary halt on nuclear and missile tests and efforts to recover missing in action soldiers from the Korean War. A glimmer of hope, perhaps.
What about Russia? That relationship is always complex.
Very complex. And despite some rhetorical overtures from the administration, there were concrete actions taken in response to perceived provocations, like expelling 60 Russian diplomats and closing the Seattle consulate after that poisoning incident in the UK. Sanctions were also imposed against Russian entities and oligarchs for roles in cyber capabilities, destabilizing activities, including election interference. And notably, a significant departure from previous policy, providing lethal aid, like Javelin anti-tank missiles, to Ukraine for the first time, aimed at bolstering Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression.
A tougher stance in practice than some rhetoric suggested.
The actions often seem tougher, yes. In the Middle East, sanctions were reinstated on Iran after withdrawing from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. The aim was maximum pressure for a new, broader deal covering missiles and regional activities.
And military action.
Militarily, strikes were ordered against Syrian air bases in 2017 and chemical weapon sites in 2018, responding to chemical attacks by the Syrian regime, signaling a willingness to use force when certain lines were crossed. There was also an intensified military approach against ISIS, leading to significant territorial losses for the group, including the liberation of Raqqa, their self-proclaimed capital, in October 2017, mostly through increased support for local partner forces.
What about alliances like NATO? There's a lot of talk about spending.
A lot of talk and consistent pressure. The administration pushed hard for increased NATO defense spending by member states. This insistence led to 10 NATO allies meeting or surpassing that 2% GDP spending threshold by 2021, a long-standing U.S. goal.
And U.S. spending increased, too.
Yes. The U.S. itself saw notable increases in military funding, $700 billion in FY18, $716 billion in FY19, reflecting a broader investment in military capabilities. And related to that, a whole new branch of the military, the Space Force, was established on December 20, 2019.
Right, Space Force.
Signifying a critical evolution in U.S. space policy, recognizing its strategic importance as space became, well, an increasingly contested domain.
Were there other notable foreign policy moves?
Quite a few, actually. Diplomatic efforts led to successful American hostage releases, over a dozen U.S. citizens freed from various countries, like journalist Austin Tice from Syria, through diplomacy and negotiation. The administration also unveiled America's first fully articulated cyber strategy in 15 years, emphasizing proactive deterrence, offensive cyber capabilities, responding to growing state-sponsored cyber threats. A comprehensive national biodefense strategy was initiated, too, to bolster defenses against biological threats, increasing funding and enhancing stockpiles of medical countermeasures.
Timely, given what came later with the pandemic.
Extremely timely in retrospect. The U.S. also asserted its protection of citizens against the International Criminal Court, ICC, arguing it could subject American servicemen to unjust prosecution for actions in places like Afghanistan. This led to sanctions against ICC officials. And finally, significant sanctions were implemented on Nicolas Maduro and his inner circle in Venezuela, aiming to isolate the regime financially and politically with the stated goal of promoting democracy there.
Wow, that's a huge range of actions.
It really is. These policy shifts collectively represent a period of significant reorientation in America's global posture and engagements, often marked by a willingness to challenge established diplomatic norms and institutions.
We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, haven't we?
We certainly have. It's a lot to take in.
It is. From the depths of economic policy, that extensive regulatory recalibration, to the targeted healthcare and social initiatives, and the complete redefinition of America's role in global trade and foreign policy. It's clear that the Trump era was marked by an immense depth and breadth of changes that continue to ripple through our society. So what does this all mean, looking back at this comprehensive deep dive into the Trump era?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think it's clear the Trump administration's policies marked a significant departure from established norms in many, many areas. This period created a legacy that, well, it continues to shape current debates and future policy directions, both here at home and internationally. Understanding these shifts, the rationale behind them, their multifaceted impacts as reported in sources like the one we use today, it's really crucial for appreciating the ongoing complexities in domestic and international affairs.
It sets the stage for today's world in many ways.
It really does. And it raises an important question, doesn't it? How will future administrations balance these diverse, often conflicting approaches? The tension between protectionism and multilateralism, or between aggressive deregulation and essential oversight. How do you balance those to achieve sustainable, equitable outcomes for all Americans while navigating an increasingly dynamic global landscape?
That fundamental challenge.
It remains highly relevant.
Right.
It's the balancing act that every administration faces.
Right.
The terms of the debate were certainly shifted during this era.
That's a powerful and lasting question for all of us to consider. As you, our listener, reflect on these profound shifts and their varied impacts, consider this final thought. In an era of rapid change and competing priorities, what single policy area from the Trump administration do you believe will have the most enduring, perhaps unforeseen, consequences on the American people, and why? Something to mull over. Think about that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and for your incredible curiosity. We truly appreciate you being here. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the issues that matter to you.